Yeah, pretty sure this is now the 24th episode of the Starbright podcast. We're doing ethical considerations in kink, specifically when things get a bit dicey,
Spicy, dicey, spicy,
dicey,
kind of
spicy,
the same thing in
when there's
kink
problems,
sometimes.
when
Yeah,
there's issues.
the ethical ambiguities within kink.
And I think you specifically wanted to talk about this, Mouse. I don't know how exactly you wanted to. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? I don't know what you mean. I
Look,
don't know nothing about kink. What are you talking about?
now that is a lie and a half. But what I wanted to talk about is the ethical ambiguities we come across in kink and how, due to the nature of kink being a topic of taboos, that there will inevitably be things that are difficult to discuss the ethical limitations and justifications for, and why not kink shaming is so essential and important. Because it's very, very easy to try to get into big conversations about the ethical nature of kinks, and very, very quickly you'll end up deciding that all of these kinks are, not even all, but most of them are ethically problematic on some way or another. The instance that I'm bringing this up is Prim and I actually had a conversation in my Discord server about Pokemon bestiality or monster fucking. Which one is it? And it was a tough conversation because at what point do you delineate Pokemon from monster? And how close to an animal does it have to be bestiality? So we've
Interesting.
had some interesting conversations about where those lines are drawn in kink. And my take has always been, it's none of my fucking business. If that's somebody's kink, who am I to decide whether it's ethically right or wrong? I only decide what's allowed in this space.
I think that's pretty fair.
But I thought it would be an interesting topic to discuss the topics that can be a little ambiguous, like things in kink that can be ambiguously ethically questionable. Things like hentai, for instance. And I'm sure as soon as I say that, you can immediately think of a couple of examples of it being a little sus.
Well, I'm also just in that whole Pokemon debate. I don't know on which side you guys ended that debate. What you guys decided on, because that's an
Prim,
interesting
did you
one.
want to
I
lay out
think.
your argument?
Well, look, my argument, all in all, wasn't especially nuanced in the fact that I just needed like an official byline from Nintendo to tell me whether or not they were animals, because they exist, in say like capacity 70% ish, like an animal would in the Pokemon world, because they don't have a lot of animals outside of Pokemon sometimes. And so, like, if they can be like, oh, they're not animals, then that would be fine because it's not bestiality. That's, you know what I mean? I was just trying to find an official line to be like, cool, like scratch that, not bestiality, problem solved. But
I feel like that
yeah,
gets
because
weirder when you
it's problematic. But
Meowth and all of that too.
Or Mr. Mime, who canonically might be sleeping with people's mothers.
Yeah. But then we get into the conversation of like, when does a werewolf just become dog fucking?
Mm-hmm.
Or
when
a
it's
vampire.
fictional,
Vampire's pretty close to being human anyway. So
Probably when you care more about the knot than you do about the fact that it's a werewolf.
well, that's the thing. Like there's people like when you look at like werewolf dildos, it's literally just a knotted dildo. That's all. So like at what point does that become bestiality?
I don't know. I don't know whether to call it all a slippery slope, but then that's the problem, right? Is people look at kink and see the entirety
The
of kink as some
slippery
slippery
slope
slope.
logical fallacy.
Exactly.
It's very, very easy to fall into the trap of, well, this is wrong. For instance, like when we were talking about the Pokemon thing, I was hesitant to make any rulings because very quickly we start getting into these like really in-depth ethical discussions. how long before we have to completely rule out all CNC related topics? Because realistically, CNC is a lot more ethically problematic than Pokemon. Like, at what
Yeah.
But
point do we have
not
to?
if Pokemon like can't consent. That's the thing. Like bestiality, you cannot consent. Whereas CNC
However,
involves
in
consent.
rape
So
roleplay, it's not necessarily consent either. I mean, we're calling it consent because that's the construct that we're agreeing upon. However, the same thing can be said to a degree about Pokemon because, like, because they're not actually real monsters, we are saying that there isn't a consent needed there, or they're not real animals. We're saying that there's a different type of consent that's required, and we're assuming that that consent is given. There's a whole lot of weird stuff that goes into these discussions, like hentai, for instance. There's a lot of stuff that happens in hentai that is ethically horrendous, but because it's hentai and we all understand it's hentai, everyone kind of just goes, I guess.
I mean, you
do
could say
they?
that
Does everyone
about
do that?
all written fiction too. I mean, the form of the media doesn't
Hmm.
really matter, right? We're just talking
Yep.
about, yeah,
Yeah,
because that's a mutable thing. It's the
it
subject
gets
matter.
into an interesting discussion every time because we get into these discussions. And once you start trying to bring like what your ethical feelings and other people's kinks in, automatically you're on the losing side. Automatically you are crossing lines and causing issues because you can't apply your ethics reasonably without demonizing and kink shaming other people. We have to understand that pretty much all kink exists on a plane of this taboo where it's all taboo in some way. And we have to decide what's okay and negotiable for us individually, but we have no right to say what is or is not okay for other people, as long as they are safely and consensually using that kink.
Which is where I would argue if you're going to draw a line, I think you kind of have to draw it at, uh, well, there's the episode where we talked about taboos, right? And not just like kink as taboo, but like taboos even within kink, stuff that is inherently, you know, can't be safe and respectful to other people. I know Mouse hates blackmail as a topic, as a genre for that very reason. How can you trust someone who's fetishizes blackmailing someone? How could you trust them with any actual information? If they ever flip that
Right. But if
switch.
that's their kink, I won't trust them. That doesn't mean that they're not allowed to have that kink.
Oh no, they
Far
can
be it
have
for
the
me to say
kink,
they can't.
but as you said, you can't define like what's good and bad. You can just define what you allow within your space, right? So,
Yep.
and that's where we have to draw the line. You can't really look at it as like, oh, that's an awful kink, and I hate that person for having it. You have to be like, okay, well, that's nice for you, but you can't be within my space.
Yep. And for me, that line is pretty firm with blackmail kink because I personally don't see how I could trust somebody engaging in that kink with anything. Like, if that's your kink, like, and you find a way to practice it in, some safe way, then whatever. That's good. That's fine. It's just not for me.
It's the same thing with like was it Guro and Vor and stuff like that too. Like you like what you like, but that's not something you can engage with outside of your imagination in a safe way. So that's another thing that generally is not allowed within spaces for that same reason.
It's a fantasy
Exactly.
versus the reality.
Yeah, there's some things you just cannot safely practice in real life, but I can appreciate that you enjoy it in theory. Not for me, but like you go off, whatever.
And but here's my question though, is because is there a point where you don't even agree with that anymore? Like you mentioned hentai. There's a lot. I mean, ages of consent in Japan are very different than they are here, but like there's a lot of stuff that is considered underage for us. That's in hentai and manga. Like, do you draw the line and say no, that's awful, that's bad? Anyone who like reads those kinds of hentais or mangas are engaging in something awful.
I would say I draw a hard line at lolly, like a hard line. Underage automatically is completely off limits. I think most people would agree with me on that.
I just See, I don't. I also do that with Guro and Vor, though. I think that's also like that's that same. I don't know. I think maybe there's a cultural consideration there because we demonize certain things more than other. Like Guro and Vor are inherently violent, right? We're more
Hmm.
desensitized to that, so I guess people are more accepting of that. But like to me, that's the same level of awful generally.
Oh, I agree. I would not have a partner into a Guro war. Like, just hard no. But who am I to stop somebody from having that kink? Just not somebody who's ever going to be with me.
That's such a hard line to walk too, because I know. I mean, you've used uh, scenes all the time from different like dojins and whatnot to make memes from and whatnot,
Yep.
and
And
that's
sometimes I find out more about that um, anime or manga later, and I decide to pull those memes. I just take them out of my rotation, just never post them again. And I feel like you do have to be able to acknowledge when maybe it's not something you should be using anymore. As soon as I find out that, oh, this character is actually a little bit underage, well, that meme's going to be deleted and never used ever again. If this character is being horribly sexually exploited, I'm never going to post it again. Like, full stop, not going to happen.
and what about people that say that that's unfair of us, or specifically of you, saying that like, hey,
Well,
it's
I
all
can only
imagination, it's not
police
hurting anyone.
I can only police what I post on my memes, and in my memes, that will just not be posted.
If anything, I would also make the argument of I'm only going to support what could be considered legal, and
Yeah.
underage themed things not legal. Um, as far as war and stuff go, yeah, the making of doujinshis and things like that would be, but it bleh,
Well, that
I
subject
can't
matter is still
speak.
illegal. You can't kill and dismember and eat people, generally speaking.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, yeah. I mean, there's people who say that they're basically writing a contract, but it's still illegal.
No,
Doesn't matter.
there was a guy just a couple years ago that entered in a legal contract to eat. He carved out like a section of his skin, and he and his friends all tried it and like ate a section of his muscle. I think it was like his upper forearm or something, and he ended up getting arrested like 2 years later for it. Um, they were fine with it for a couple years, nothing happened, and then eventually he was prosecuted, and he ended up going to jail because it doesn't matter that there was a legal contract. The action itself is still
Yeah.
illegal.
You can't make you can't make something legal by putting an illegal thing into a legal binding contract. It's still a crime.
Yep. But
Yeah.
and that's part of the problem though, is because like look at like book talk. A lot of the book talk kink books are about subject matter that is illegal. I mean,
Hmm.
we call it CNC because we know it's being written in that manner, but like they'll have things that are CNC adjacent or rape adjacent, even just straight out. They have things, blackmail scenes, they have all that kind of stuff in it. Like how do you draw that line? Like that stuff is
Honestly,
technically
they're
illegal.
written so bad they could be illegal. That's where the line should be drawn.
When the writing's so bad, it can be illegal. Yeah.
Yeah.
that's that's fair.
I think the bigger issues also with those books is a lot of those books don't provide trigger warnings for such things either. Because even though they claim it's CNC, no, that's still just a rape scene. Those characters aren't talking out anything beforehand and agreeing to do a type of scene together. It's not
Right.
CNC.
They're not actually using the kink. They're just using the buzzword for the kink to get away with writing rape scenes.
Yep.
And I think that's also problematic. That was part of the reason I had such issues with Haunting Adeline, besides the fact that it's fucking terribly written. They were saying that it was filled with all of these kinks, but none of those things depicted were actually the kinks because none of the elements used were consensual in any way.
But and that's my point though, is because that's then now illegal as well. So if you draw the line at just illegality, I mean, hey, we might be agreeing to it, but if you're a masochist, getting beaten up by a sadist, that person could walk out of whatever club or whatever home you're in doing this, say, hey, this guy just beat me up. Look at all my bruises, and they would probably be arrested. Now, fighting that out in court is always very messy. I know Kink does not generally get looked upon favorably in court. If someone says, hey, look, this person beat me up and has bruises all over, and one person says, hey, no, it was consensual, unless you have some really, really, really hard evidence, generally it finds in favor of the person who was beat up. But like, my point is that in the right context, a lot of things that we do that are legal in the context of kink, can be taken to be illegal in any other context. Like almost all of it is troublesome in the right context, right?
I agree. I think we get into these really like cyclical ethical debates about these things very quickly because the nature of kink is to be taboo. And we're going to talk ourselves in circles endlessly when we try to get into these ethical conversations because, first of all, who are we to decide what is and is not ethical when we're all practicing some pretty sus shit at the end of the day? You know, that's what we're doing. We're doing things that are taboo. It's a little sus, things that are a little uncomfortable for the average person because they can't find a way to ethically understand how it's consensual. And we, as people who are practicing kink, understand that. But we also have to remember that when we get into these conversations, that there is inevitably going to be gray spaces, that it's kind of hard to account for the ethical nature of what's going on. And it comes up pretty often. Running a server, we run into things all the time where, well, should we allow this? Well, do I like it? No, but like I really can't put a moratorium on it reasonably if I've always allowed it previously. Because if I start getting into that and I start having to get into ethically why it's inappropriate, then it's going to turn into a whole thing. And it's probably going to have a trickle down effect on everything else. And I don't want to start that because it gets really messy really fast just due to the nature of kink.
Which is why you partially draw the line at stuff that is just cannot be legal under any context, right?
No, legality is not the thing that I draw the line at because CNC is
Well, I
legal.
mean, I
Like
mean legal
that's
under any context, right? So stuff like
uh,
poly.
no, that's not usually for the server at least. I wrote out rules and I follow those rules. If it's allowed in the rules and I really don't think it should be allowed in the rules, then we'll discuss changing the rules. But if it follows the rules, it follows the rules, and that's it. If it doesn't follow the rules, then you're banned. And that's it. That's where the line is.
Uh,
Sometimes I, think about having to change the rules, but I never change the rules on my own. I always bring it to a vote so that many people have their vote in what's going on instead of just me single-handedly changing what is and is not allowed in this space. But the only thing I can control is what happens in the spaces that I have a say in what's posted. Anyone can be into anything they want to be, and it's none of my fucking business what that is.
which is fair, but how does someone else who's trying to find the same lines to draw, like, how do they figure out where those lines are? What would be like, because it is so messy and so hard to draw those lines and figure out what the right thing to do is, which is what we're all trying to do, right? We're all just trying to find the right thing to do.
Exactly.
So like the thing that's not going to hurt anybody, the thing that's helps everyone be
So I wouldn't
comfortable.
even say that. You need to decide what for you is the line. For you, where is it no longer okay? Because for you, that's where that line's going to be. And you can decide where that line is for yourself. You cannot decide where that line is for anybody else. So if you feel that something is too far, then listen to yourself. That's correct. That is exactly what's true for you, and that's what you should listen to. If you feel like something is ethically not okay, then that's fine. That's ethically not okay for you. But you cannot apply your ethical boundaries onto anyone else reasonably.
Mm,
Does
I
that
think
make
that's a
sense to
fair thing to
anybody
say.
else? Okay. Because that's pretty much where I land is I have my own opinions on what is and is not okay, but I try really hard to not apply them to anyone else ever because it's not my business to do so.
Well, that makes sense.
What
But I
about you,
think it's
Prim?
something that needs to be discussed every so often because it comes up so often where we start having these discussions.
What about you, Prim? Do you fuck Pokemon?
No, actually, I was anti-fucking Pokemon. Weirdly enough. But
Ah. No, it's not weirdly enough. If
um,
anyone's going to be about fucking monsters, it's Mouse to begin with, so it's totally
well,
understandable.
Oh, definitely not. Not
I
me.
with Pokemon as well, like the crossover into like all the trainers and stuff being underage and stuff. It
Yeah.
it casts a wide net. Um,
Yeah, the whole
but
Pokemon thing makes me very uncomfortable for many reasons.
mostly because you have to spend days fighting about it with me. You know, get anything else
Oh,
done.
that did not make me happy either.
Yeah, I don't know because like I can see the point of like the ethicality and individuality of what you can and can't apply to other people, but in like a community setting, determining like when it's not just one person in charge, like say it's a a large community of like what isn't allowed, like I think there has to be like group decisions made on like what isn't ethical.
Yes, and
um
that's why,
and there
like,
needs
in
to
our
be some sort
server
of
space, for instance, we
you know
have rules set up, and we
yeah,
stick
it was
to
just
those
sort of
rules.
like we were saying, like how do you come to those decisions on your own though? Because like obviously in a group setting you've got a guide by what other people they're like, oh well, these things are too far, you can sort of set that up based on ideals that exist. But if you're coming into it on your own to find out your own ethics about where things lie, like somebody new to the scene without any sort of like guidance and stuff would be finding
If
finding
you
out what taboo is too taboo for them personally, like
if you
individually would
find
be
a taboo, you find
yep.
a kink, and you're just like, "Holy shit, that's not okay," and it gives you the ick, that's a reasonable line to draw. That is a reasonable line to draw. The second you go, "Okay, this makes me uncomfortable," that's your line. You found it. Because there's things in this community that I have heard about and immediately just been repulsed by, and those things have stuck.
Ugh.
So I don't think I have repulsion. I just like, okay, that's not good. Like objectively to me, that is not good. You know what I mean? Like in
Yeah,
no way
I
am I
know
like,
what you mean.
that's a child. That's not good. I'm not repulsed by it. Like I'm definitely not fucking turned on by it. But like, I mean, it doesn't have any, um, I don't know, like emotional effect on me in that way. I'm just like, well, that's not good. You don't do that. And that obviously when it's the lines where things like become, like you're saying, like lol and that kind of stuff, where things are like obviously not real, sort of fantasy, but it's still not good. Like,
Yeah.
everything's like a sliding scale. It's like, would
Yeah,
you
and
rather
one of
they
the
like
things
look at hentai that's fucking underage than go out and find somebody who's underage? Like,
I actually
it's
have
not
another
good.
point
None
for
of it.
us for lolly stuff. Not specifically lolly stuff, but people who I saw this post recently on Facebook and it kind of annoyed me. And I want to hear you guys' opinion. Somebody posted that I don't care if they're underage or not. If their body shape looks like they're underage, that's a fucking problem. Stop fantasizing about underage bodies. And I was like, oh, well, that's kind of weird because, like, what about people who just don't become curvy? There's a lot of people who move into adulthood with a very similar body shape than they had when they were young teens. And that's invalidating to them to say that, anyone who likes their body shape just likes children.
Yep.
Like, we can talk about how pedophilia is wrong without body shaming adults who just don't have stereotypically voluptuous bodies.
It's
Oh, it's the same thing as people who are. And I don't mean to be any kind of fat phobic here, but it's the same people that are like almost, fat fetishizing themselves who go like, "Oh, look at these, curvy, beautiful women in media. Like these body types don't exist." It's like, no, they very much do exist. All those body types exist. Every body type exists. People have different body types. Those are all things that happen.
Yep.
You can be angry you don't
Yep.
see representations of yourself, but don't be angry looking at the representation of something that isn't you. That's just not fair because there's a lot of people that are going to find something in common with that, whether or not it's
Yeah.
someone that looks like they're 13 when they're 30. I've known people like that. I've had friends that look like they were 13 when they were fucking 42. Like it's just how some people are.
I've been known to look a lot younger than I am. I usually don't get mistaken as a teenager anymore, but young 20s is pretty common for me. Sometimes even a teenager, depending on where I'm at. But the thing is, it's fucking weird to sit here and tell me that anyone who finds me attractive is doing so because they're into kids. I'm like, well, no, they're not into kids. They're finding me attractive because they mistook me at my age for being, 20 something. And yes, while that's weird, it's not
No, they're
predatory
they're not they're not into kids. They're into
automatically.
you. But the problem is the person accusing you thinks you look like a kid, so they're thinking that the other person thinks you look like a kid. It's projection, is what it is. Because that's
It's
ridiculous.
an awkward conversation because I have conversations sometimes. I know Prim and I have had this conversation where yes, I get uncomfortable if somebody is attracted to me because I'm young looking. That's uncomfortable. If you're attracted to me because I'm young looking, that's fucking weird. But liking how I look, not just because I look young, totally fine. Not that weird.
People have a hard time like understanding something like that, and it's the same thing when we're talking about drawing a line ethically in kink, is because I know what I think about different kinks. I'm not into feet. I made that joke. It's very true. I'm not
Yep.
into feet. And so like I think feet are pretty gross. Like I'm not like if I see someone's feet, I'm not flinching away from them. It's just, I don't care their feet. I just would never put someone's foot in my mouth. You know, that I
Right.
draw that line. And but I understand the difference between myself just not wanting to ever put feet in my mouth and thinking that's disgusting for me. I would never, if someone else really likes feet, if someone else likes putting feet in their mouth, I'm never seriously gonna be like, oh, you're disgusting. That's disgusting. Because I think that's disgusting. That's not, they don't. They don't. They
Right.
don't have that point of view. They have a different
Exactly.
point of view than I do.
Don't
That's not fair.
don't yuck someone else's yum.
Yep.
And I think that that's very fair. Like, there's a lot of kinks that I am hardcore not into. There's even kinks where I'll cringe and make faces involuntarily, not because I'm like shaming them, because it makes me uncomfortable. Like, you go and do your thing, babe. I am happy that you enjoy it. Stay away from me maybe with that, but like, you're welcome to whatever you want to be into. The thing is, I can set a boundary on what is and is not okay for me in my space and reasonably expect that to be followed. And as long as that's followed and you're doing your thing, I'm doing my thing, you're keeping your thing in your space and my thing in my space, I'm good. I'm solid. I've got no complaints.
Yep. As it should be. And, and I don't, no one should complain about like what you don't want in your space either. Because especially like on the server that you run, it's your server. You run it. If you
Hmm.
don't want something that you don't like in your space, that's totally fair.
And to be honest, the things that are banned from my server aren't banned because I don't like them. They're banned because it gets really difficult to moderate and justify in the Discord terms of service. A lot of things that are technically banned from my server are banned because they're actually against Discord terms of service.
There's that to consider too.
Yeah, I also very carefully read the terms of service on the platform that I'm posting on or running a community on, because that
probably a
really
good idea.
does significantly alter how I do certain things, how I write certain rules, it makes a big difference.
Probably more people should be doing that.
A lot of people don't realize that Discord actually really does have very strict TOS on blood and gore and things like that. So I did consider that when I wrote my server rules.
I mean, as it should be, you know. Because like I mean that's probably the most important thing is like I don't I don't generally care what rule set someone's using as long as you know it's being done in a way to well, A, you should be following the terms of service of whatever service you're on, but B, then also to, protect the people who are in your community, from something that's dangerous or illegal. Generally, you're probably doing all right. It's just, if you're going to be running a public space or in a public space, you should be making sure that there's a rule set there, some kind of rule set, or that you need to enact one if you're the one running it. Because it's usually the spaces that don't have those rules that end up, in the worst positions, whether it's being shut down, whether it's people being prosecuted for things, or just awful shit happening. It's usually the places where someone didn't put their foot down and say, "Hey, no, we're not going to allow that
Yep.
here."
If it gets to the point where it's clearly becoming abusive, even if it's something that wouldn't technically normally break the rules, we can make an executive decision that, hey, we're going to stop this now.
And if you're in a space where someone wasn't doing that, you probably just should leave, right?
Yeah. If you were in a space where somebody wasn't defending your rights and you were being severely made uncomfortable, where it was clearly abusive, because there's a certain point where something becomes abusive. And I would say where that's crossing boundaries, you've set boundaries, you've established boundaries, and somebody keeps pushing past those boundaries, that's when it becomes abusive. And if that was ongoing and somebody had set a very clear, reasonable boundary and it wasn't being followed, I would absolutely put my foot down there. And I think that most people should.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
How do you feel about that, Prim and Cat?
I mean, on the face of it, yeah, I think not everybody um, understands how to put down boundaries. So as a generalization, it's pretty okay. But
Well, I think that one of the big things in kink is you shouldn't be in kink if you can't set boundaries. Like, if you cannot set boundaries, you should not be participating in kink in general. Like, that's no longer safe. You cannot safely participate in the kink community if you're not setting boundaries.
Mhm.
Would you agree, Will?
Yeah, being able to set boundaries is like one of the cornerstones of kink. You have to be able to say no. You have to. You absolutely have to. Like I don't like listen, I know some people are so submissive. They don't like saying no. They want to be people pleasers. They want to be, service subs. They
But
don't want
they
to tell
still
someone no and
shouldn't
make
be
them
in
unhappy,
kink.
but yeah, well, here's the whole thing. The whole thing is that everybody involved should be happy, and that includes you. You should never be so unwilling to say no that you're going to do things that you don't want to do or that makes you unhappy, because then you're engaging in the scene, in a very unhealthy way. And if the person or people you're doing things with, yeah, have any kind of goodness to them whatsoever, they shouldn't be letting you do things that are going to make you unhappy or sad, or go past whatever boundaries you might have too. So it's like, and if they find out later that like, oh, you only did that because I wanted you to, you didn't want to do that at all, you think they're going to be happy about that? They're going to be very upset about it, if
I
there's
will
any salt to it.
also add to the caveat, like, we do have issues in service sometimes with people with trouble setting boundaries. And we always discuss it this way. If somebody is coming to me and they're complaining about abuse, we did have this issue a couple weeks back where somebody was complaining about being abused by somebody else. But when I spoke to them about it, it became very, very clear very, very quickly they hadn't actually set any boundaries. And I wasn't really sure what to do because you're not really able to say that you're being harassed if you've never actually communicated or set boundaries. And I, in a kink community especially, can't set boundaries on your behalf. Like, it's not really something I can do.
Yep.
So I had a whole conversation of, well, I can't really do much until you set this boundary yourself. And I told them I would help them write any messages. I would help them, come up with a way to communicate these. They could send a message. I mean, I'd help them with that if they were ready. They just never reached out to me to want to do it. But that's the thing. You are responsible for setting your own boundaries. And if you can't do that, you are the unsafe person in the community. The unsafeness is coming from inside the house. Like if you cannot communicate your own boundaries, you are the person who is causing the danger.
Yeah, it's like it's a maturity thing, you know. I know growing up, a lot of people feel like they can't say no because it's your parents or it's your teacher, it's authority figures, it's your boss. You know, you can't say no. And I think a large part of growing up is the realization like, hey, no, you're your own person. You can absolutely tell anyone at any time for anything no if you're uncomfortable, if that crosses a boundary for you for any reason, even if it's just like I'm happy right now, I don't want to do this, it'll make me unhappy. That's your right. And there are other considerations in there. If it's your boss telling you to do your job and you're saying no, you're being the dick there. Sure, absolutely. But anyone can just say no at any time. And in a situation like especially when you're seeing where that's not just your mental health. Like I hate going to work every day. This isn't I hate going to work every day. This person is gonna beat the shit out of me because I'm saying they can beat the shit out of me because they want to. They're going to leave bruises all over my body. This is physical health. This could be your life. I'm going to let them tie me up. If you're not comfortable with that, you have to be able to set a boundary. You have to be able to say no. As we've talked about it before, this isn't like, oh, willy nilly going to run through, the sunflower field with butterflies and rainbows. No, this is kink. I'm going to let this person wrap their hands around my neck and choke me,
We
but
have
I'm
to
not
be
comfortable
very,
with
very
that.
clear too. Just because you were the party that was harmed doesn't mean that you were inherently the victim if you did not communicate that there was a problem before the scene started, that there was a boundary being crossed. If you didn't communicate with that, you are just as much at fault.
Yep, and it's not. I'm not.
Full
I don't.
stop.
I don't want anyone to be like victim blaming because it's not. It's not a victim. It didn't happen to you without your consent, because that's one of the other
Mhm,
cornerstones is consent. By not being able to set that boundary during a negotiation, you consented to that. You did legitimately
mhm.
do this to yourself. This wasn't like she was asking for it. It kind of directly is. You did ask for it because you did not say no, or you asked
And
for it
then you didn't.
literally because you didn't know what you
Mhm.
wanted and just thought the other person would want that. But that's on you.
Yeah, and if you didn't like what was going on, you were no longer comfortable, and you didn't say anything, that becomes a problem, especially if you're in, or not in like a non-kink scenario. You're the victim in a non-kink scenario. But if you have gone
100%.
into a kink scenario where you have discussed this at length, you know what's going to happen, and then when things are about to happen, you freak out about it, but instead of hey, pause, yellow, I need to talk about this some more, you say nothing. You are the problem. You are the entire problem, actually. Like, you need to be able to communicate when you are uncomfortable. And you are not safe in the kink community if you're not doing so.
And I this is just an because this isn't just related to kink, right? I feel like that's a big problem that people have just generally because and it's not just the inability to set boundaries. It's the what would be a good way to put this? It's doing things or having relationships of any kind, even just as friends, with people who you know can't be trusted to follow boundaries or respect a boundary that you would set. And that's part of the reason why those some people aren't able to set boundaries because they think someone's just not going to respect it at all. Like I've known people that would go out with someone, start a relationship with someone, knowing that, hey, I don't know what's going to happen if we ever broke up. Like this person could go crazy. They could beat me up. They could kill me. They could, do XYZ to harm me, that kind of thing. And they'll still start a relationship with that person. you should never be doing anything with anyone in any kind of relationship where you can't trust they can be mature enough and adult enough to go, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you," and turn around and walk away without harming you. If they can't be trusted to follow boundaries and be a mature, rational person, then you shouldn't be doing anything with them. And that extends to everything in life. You know, if you know someone who's like, oh, they're gonna go crazy and kill me if I ever broke up with them, you shouldn't go out with them to begin with. Don't go like, oh, I hope it never ends, so they'll never kill me. What the fuck is that? And it's the same thing in the scene too. Don't start scening with someone where you might think, oh, hey, if I call out red, they're gonna keep going. You should never start a scene with that person. It doesn't matter how much you negotiate beforehand and you know what's going to happen and you think it's going to be fine. If you think they're not going to respect a call of red, you shouldn't do something with that person. It's and I think that's a large part of the problem is that people have been in situations where it ended up the person that they thought they could trust was someone who they couldn't trust, who wouldn't follow their boundaries. And then so they
Yes.
just think, "Hey, I can't set boundaries anymore because the people I know aren't going to follow them."
Shitty people ruin things for people all the time, but the reality is when you come into a kink scene, if you are not ready and willing to be able to communicate your boundaries, you shouldn't be going into a kink scene full stop. You should be starting easy, maybe with some really, really light things, nothing that is going to prevent you from calling out or tapping out. You need to be doing baby steps to get into kink at this point. You are not safe to be just hopping into kink and hoping for the best. Like this is too much, too quick, and you need to back off real fast.
I think a lot of people don't understand that though, or feel like, oh, I'm trying to get better as a person and setting boundaries and whatnot, but I'm not there yet. But I want to have fun while I'm doing
If
it,
you're
and
not
then
there yet, you shouldn't be engaging in kink. I'm sorry. Like until you can act well, let me put it this way. You shouldn't be engaging in hard kink. Nothing that requires serious communication and tap outs, nothing like bondage, nothing like heavy impact. If you are not ready to call out your boundaries the second it crosses your mind that a boundary might be being crossed, you are not anywhere near ready to be in those scenes. You need to be doing baby steps. If you're working on your boundaries, good. Then I hope you and your partner work on your boundaries, or you work on your boundaries yourself, with your therapist, whatever it is you're doing. That's fantastic, and I'm very happy for you. This is great, and I'm really glad that that's something that you're developing. But you shouldn't be in kink if you're not able to communicate very clearly what your boundaries are. It's not safe for anyone, you or your partner.
I'm sure probably like most of us have been in situations where someone we were with was not there when they thought they were, because that's a pretty common thing, I think.
Yeah, I think we've all come across people too where we thought they were really good at communicating, then we found out, oh, I was wrong. Okay, you know, where you thought you were getting good communication, then you weren't. I think everyone can think of at least one example of this happening. Am I right?
I definitely can.
Yeah. Sometimes you don't know that you're getting bad communication until it's too late.
This
Yeah.
whole line of people's boundaries and stuff. In most sexual situations, people find their boundaries are overrun. So, but like, I mean, even
I
in society, like boundaries are ignored on the daily because most things are based on predation, especially sexual things.
Oh yeah,
Um,
for sure.
so knowing when to have boundaries and how to enforce them without pushback or the threat of, I mean, even like we would say, like in relationships, like it's all well and good setting boundaries, but the majority of boundaries are going to be ignored. That's just societally expected.
Yes, but within kink, that's
There's like a
something that
degree of privilege
we
in that
have.
that isn't being addressed, I think.
I don't
Same as
think that
communication.
I think that you're really jumping ahead of yourself with the privilege there, because I too have gone through having a lot of my boundaries pushed and crossed. But the thing is, because I was in kink, I have prioritized really putting those boundaries, especially in kink scenarios, especially in scenes. It is incredibly important that we prioritize that. And if you are interested in getting into kink, and yes, you may not have good relationship with boundaries when you're thinking about getting into kink, but by the time you're getting ready to enter a scene, you have to have this skill set or you are an unsafe person in that scene. And I understand that it can be really difficult to get there, but there's no amount of, well, I wasn't there for it, so, we all got hurt because I wasn't ready. That's okay. Every person getting hurt because you weren't able to communicate doesn't make it okay. You're just, it's basically a ticking time bomb waiting to go off. You do have to be working on these things and be at a place where you are ready and safe to be in that dynamic before you can safely enter that dynamic.
And I'd say that's a large part of ethical considerations in kink too. Is you have to
Yes.
make sure that anything you're doing is ethical. It's not just like what you will allow in terms of content around you too. It's also the people around you as well. And like I know Mouse has had this experience. I'm sure we've all met people in like online community groups and stuff that were not mature enough and not rational enough and not able to follow the basic rules of communication and setting boundaries and whatnot and being informed to participate in those spaces, even if they're not partaking in the taboo or the rule breaking and stuff like that. Just even with the normal stuff, that they just cannot be trusted. Because I'd argue that that person you mentioned, Mouse, where they never set boundaries, that's exactly that example of that. They ethically cannot be partaking or should not be partaking because they cannot follow some of the basic ground rules that allow you to ethically partake, such as set boundaries.
I agree. And I feel like it can sound pretty harsh to say that you shouldn't be in the scene if you can't do this, but ethically, it is a necessity. If you are entering a scene when you cannot communicate your boundaries, you are going to cause harm to other people, not just yourself. You will be causing actual harm, psychological, possibly legal harm to other people because you couldn't assess that you were not ready. And that is a huge part of the ethical considerations of kink, is recognize when you are not ready to be in a situation.
Yep. And
That's all well and good, but not being ready and being pushed into things is societally. I mean, that's driving. That's sex with regular people. That the workplace. Like these things aren't any different. Like victims are still there, based on your inability to communicate like your needs or do things that you weren't sure you were ready to do.
Well, absolutely,
Like,
but that's the thing.
You
So anyone who's coming into a dynamic has to make sure that they are in a place where they can safely engage. You can only really control your element and vet the other person. And sometimes you're going to vet wrong. It does happen. Unfortunately, there will be a time where you vet somebody and you just didn't catch something. We've all had that happen. It happens. You just have to be very, very aware of what's going on. However, if you are entering that scene and you are not optimally prepared and ethically aware of everything involved, including yourself and your own limitations and your ability to communicate and set boundaries, you are entering the dynamic as an unsafe party. And that is ethically not okay. That is part of the ethical considerations of kink, and it's something that's really, really important. And I'm not going to say that it's easy to do or that society makes it easy. None of what society does makes kink easy. We are working on things that are outside of the way normal society operates. When we talk about things like consent, we talk about things that most of society doesn't really think about with consent. We have a very, very complex view of consent. We should also have a very, very complex view of boundaries and the ethical considerations of being ready for a scene. Like all of these things are part and parcel of the same discussion. You cannot fully consent if you cannot set boundaries.
That's correct.
If you are entering a scene and you can't set boundaries, then you cannot possibly be a consenting partner. a consenting partner has to also be aware that they need to withdraw consent and they need to call halt and set a boundary when they need to before they get hurt, before they hurt somebody else. It is absolutely essential. And I know it's hard. I'm not denying that it's difficult. I did not just magically wake up and have the ability to communicate. I worked for it. It was not easy for me either. It's not easy for anyone to communicate. It's a skill set we all had to learn. And some of us had a steep learning curve to get there. However, it can be harder for some other people, yes, but it is something that you do have to work on. And in order to safely engage in kink, you do have to really be in a place where you can effectively communicate and set boundaries in order to be a consenting partner.
Hmm. That's how you stop stuff like what happened to that one person from happening. You know, like you should never feel like you're being harassed. Because you should be able to tell someone, hey, if you're harassing me, or if you're doing this, you're harassing me, and then that's how that person can know that they're crossing a line, and
This is
then
a
you can
shitty
go.
example because ACAB and all, but like if you were to go to the police and say this person's harassing me, what's the first thing they'd say? Did you tell
Did
them to
you
stop?
did you tell them? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Like, absolutely, shitty example because, what are they going to do anyway, honestly, the police? But like, if you think about it, like the first thing anyone's going to ask if you go to an authority figure and say this person's harassing me, they're the first thing they're going to do is, did you set a boundary? How did you
Yep.
communicate this boundary? If the
That is a
boundary
shitty
is set
example.
already, it is a shit example, but this is how it works. If your kids are at school and they're getting picked on by somebody, the first thing the teacher is going to ask is, did you tell them to stop? Because that kid
But
may
that
not
doesn't work either.
understand that they're bothering you. You do
Yep.
have to communicate these things. Like that is just part of being a consenting person is you can't consent to something if you can't also not consent to it. The nature of consenting means that you have to be able to not consent to.
Yeah, and that's
And
that's that's I think one of the biggest problems though is that in communities is that I think a lot of people that's like one lesson that a lot of people don't learn, or for other reasons they're so desperate for people's approval and validation that they don't want to set boundaries about how they
and
feel
that
because they
is
just.
the most dangerous type of
Yep.
partner too.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree completely, and or I don't disagree at all. I should say, and especially if you're looking at vetting someone or just even just looking for friends, you should very much be on the lookout for that. Because if you can't have a relationship where there's one side that's selfish about wanting to be happy. That's not a relationship. That doesn't go both ways.
Right.
It has to go both ways. You should want to enjoy each other's company. You should want for both of you to be happy. Otherwise, what's the point? If only one person is making the other person happy, then that's abusive. That's completely abusive. It has to go
But
both
that is the
ways.
idealized idea of a relationship, though, like in society.
It is, but society is not necessarily what we're trying to mimic within BDSM.
I'd I,
We are
I'd
doing
I'd say
something
I'd say
slightly
we're
different.
we're we're trying to very much not follow society because society, has all of those. I know Prim used the word privilege before. It's not exactly how I'd phrase it, but they have a lot of those expectations and a lot of those beliefs that are not healthy. And especially, I've talked about it
Mhm.
before on the
Yeah.
podcast. The Disney romanticized version of romance that everyone thought was true for the last like 400 years in society of you have one soulmate, you find that soulmate, you never divorce. Doesn't matter how awful it gets, you never divorce. And we do the exact opposite. And
Mhm.
I would appreciate it if society more tried to follow us. And in some ways, society's gotten a lot better. I think we're becoming a lot better at recognizing when people have mental health issues, and especially when it comes to self-esteem and stuff like that. And people are getting better at being able to put their foot down and say no. I think generally, But there's still a lot of people that don't learn that lesson, you know, and uh, you have to you have to be able to say, and as much as you might like someone, you have to be able to say, hey, I think you need to learn to put your foot down. I don't want to make you unhappy because you feel you have to adhere to what I want. I don't want that. And if you can't do that, then we can't be friends or we can't be in a relationship because otherwise you're just going to be hurting them
I agree.
without
And
wanting to,
sometimes it
not
really
intentionally.
sucks. Yeah, and sometimes it really sucks, especially like in the case of somebody who is unable to communicate effectively. And you may absolutely adore this person, but you have to recognize when it's an unsafe dynamic. If this person is unable to communicate that they're having a boundary and frequently, for example, like I don't know exactly I was trying to come up with an example here, but my brain's kind of not braining. Y'all know what I mean. So if you were frequently coming out of a scene with that partner, you know, being catatonic and being unable to speak, and then they have to come to you later and try to say, well, I didn't really like how this went, and you have to go, well, why didn't you stop me every time? You need to recognize that you are not helping by trying to keep doing scenes with that person. All you're doing is engaging in their self harm. You're adding to their self harm. They are engaging in self harm by choosing to enter these scenes that they cannot physically consent to or set boundaries around. I would argue very strongly, in fact, that entering into a BDSM kink dynamic when you can't communicate effectively and can't communicate your boundaries effectively, it doesn't matter what the reasoning is, that would be a type of self harm.
No, 100% is. And it's not just hurting the one person either because and I
No.
mentioned it before is because like I don't want to permanently, I mean, like actually hurt someone else in a way that they don't like after the fact, you know? I don't want to do that. But if you allow me to do something that makes you unhappy in the moment without being able to say no, you are making me break my own ethical lines because I never wanted to do that. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter how much I love whatever it was I was doing. Doesn't matter what fetish it's linked to. If it's making you unhappy, that is not something I wanted from that. Therefore, you are making me
Nope.
break my own ethical lines without me knowing about
Yeah.
it, and you're kind of doing it intentionally. It's unintentional on my part, but it's entirely intentional on your part to allow me to do that. And knowing that it makes you unhappy and thinking that would make me happy, and that's not the point. And if there is someone who would be made happy by doing something to you that makes you unhappy, that's not something again, that's not something you should be doing something with. But you were hurting me by doing that. You're hurting the person you're with by doing that because they probably don't want you to be
Yeah.
unhappy either. So you're breaking their ethics without them knowing
Yeah.
about it, which is very fucked.
If you're not communicating where your limits and boundaries are, you are harming both yourself and your partner every time.
Okay, I think we covered a lot of the ethical stuff, right? I'd say we
Yeah,
did pretty good. Cat,
I
Prim,
think
either
we
of you
hit
have
more
something
on the
to
communication stuff too.
either of you have anything to throw in there?
I've kind of just been absorbing everything this episode, to be
Well, what
honest.
do you think?
Um,
What's your takeaway?
there's a big difference for me on my own like boundaries between fantasy and reality. So I know personally where my boundaries are. I can respect them in places like kink spaces and things like that that other people enjoy their own. Um, but in my own personal scenes, I plan for my scenes with my partner, things like that.
Exactly.
Hmm.
What do you think about the idea of boundaries being set? And if you can't set boundaries, you shouldn't be in a scene. Do
Oh,
you
I
agree?
absolutely agree with that. Yes, there's. I think it gets a little tricky for myself when I was exploring more of what I would be into. But again, you kind of hit that where you avoid the harder stuff until you know what you like with the lighter things.
Yes. You kind of ease into it. You don't just hop in the deep end. I'll give an
Yep.
example of something I've heard from a friend. This is actually another server member who told me this story. I'm going to keep it anonymous. But he hooked up with somebody through Tinder, and they started talking. They were both into the same kinks. She had kink friendly on her page. They started talking. She's into some really hard shit, and she's talking about all this experience she has. And they decided to meet up after vetting for a bit. And obviously, this vetting was not very extensive, but they're supposed to be just doing a one-time thing, just a one-time hookup. So they weren't doing any extensive vetting. He gets there, and they are planning to do an intense, not super intense, but like a fairly intense CNC scene, but within reason for like a just showing up. And they're gonna sit down and talk first. And she starts hyperventilating and crying. And she had just chosen not to mention that she had just been SA'd within the last month and was just trying to try for the first time a CNC scene to feel better about it. And she didn't communicate this whatsoever. That's horrifying for every
Yep.
party involved. He left fucking traumatized. Because what if he'd have gone through with this? Like, what if she hadn't said something? Holy shit.
Yep.
Like, it's horrifying. And yes, she is a victim. Let's not pretend that she's not. She was victimized by somebody. But she harmed somebody else and was about to cause further harm by failing to communicate. And that's huge.
Yep.
We have to acknowledge that you can be a victim and cause harm to other people by failing to communicate. And it sucks, but with the BDSM and kink especially, communication is the overarching theme. Consent and communication, those are our two hallmarks, the most important things to us. Communication and consent. If either of these is lacking, you will cause harm. And we need to be very mindful of that. What about you, Prim?
Yeah, for the most part. I think failure to do things and inability to do things are not mutually exclusive. But if you like in the examples you gave where somebody repeatedly not being able to set a boundary, once you've discovered somebody's inability to set a boundary, continued experience with that person is a failure on your part also, because at that point you're being unsafe, I think, as well. Like when you
Yes,
recognize they
but
can't set a boundary, you need to set the boundary, you know what I mean?
I do
But
want to
finding out
touch
in
on
the
that
first
real
place
quick,
can be,
though.
problematic both ways
Saying
because
that
it sucks.
somebody not failing to set a boundary versus not being able to set a boundary, those are very much the same thing. And it's just all about how you look at it. I can acknowledge some people have trouble setting boundaries, and I respect and appreciate and support them. But that doesn't mean they have any business in kink either. Not until they're able to do that communication. I want to be very real that it doesn't really matter what their intent was, why they were having trouble communicating these things. At the end of the day, what still matters is that they didn't communicate. You could have the best intentions in the world, but if you didn't communicate, you still caused harm.
Yep.
I can, think of a million different reasons that I would be very sympathetic for somebody not communicating to me the issue, but that doesn't make it a whole lot better.
No. And I'd say it's incredibly self-centered if you think, and I don't mean you, Prim. I mean, like, if a person in this situation thinks just because they have good intentions about it makes it okay. It's the phrase "good intentions are pave the road to hell."
Yeah,
That's
the road to
that's
hell
that's
is
what that
paved with
is.
good intentions.
It
Yep.
doesn't. I hope everyone has good intentions at all times. That's what we
Yeah.
want. That's great. Fantastic.
Yeah.
But you
You can
can't
still cause harm with the best intentions in the world.
absolutely.
You bring a bunch of cookies to class one day and they happen to be peanut butter and kill a kid. I mean, that would still be on you, even though you meant to do a good thing. Like, that's a pretty extreme example, obviously, but like, you may have the best intentions, but the actions and their consequences are still your fault.
Yeah, it doesn't mean you can just go and do whatever you want, you
Yeah.
know. And
It's very
especially
important
when
to
when
recognize that intentions don't change the outcome. We talk about this all the time in the admin community too, where you may not have meant to say something offensive, but it was fucking offensive. And that doesn't change the fact that it was offensive.
and I'll say there is a lot of gray area though, because Prim is right in that, you know, because there's a lot of gray area in most places regarding good intentions. You know, you didn't intend to say something offensive, and the reason why we just say, oh hey, don't say that. I know you didn't intend to hurt anyone, but someone here takes offense to that. We just say that, and the
Yeah,
person goes okay, and we carry on with our day. It's not a more serious issue because we
exactly.
know that person had good intentions, right? That's
Yes.
very different when we're talking about the cornerstones of kink. All right, uh,
Yes.
knowledge slash informed consent, being able to set boundaries and being able to communicate are the three cornerstones of kink for really good reasons. Those aren't rules you can break with any kind of intentions. I don't care, good, bad, whatnot. I don't care what you think about it. Those are embedded in the bedrock. You have to follow those completely. You have
Hmm.
to. Otherwise, kink is not kink. Otherwise, you are doing something that is wrong or abusive in some way, or I should say, can turn into something wrong and abusive very easily because you didn't follow those bedrock rules.
I wholly agree. I think there's a lot of reasons that I would take somebody's intentions into account, but there's just as many reasons that it just doesn't fucking matter.
It's just very situational, mostly, just not
Yeah.
in certain circumstances like this one. Most of the
Yeah.
time I do want to know, did you actually mean to hurt that person, or, is that totally intentional?
Yeah.
Did you have good intentions?
There's that example that they give to little kids where, you cut up a piece of paper into little pieces and then you say, I'm sorry to it. Does that change the fact that it's shredded into little pieces?
No, no, no.
No.
And it doesn't
It's
matter if the
it's still
paper's not
shredded.
important, but this is a really important paper.
Mhm.
You can't cut this one up.
Right. Say, you thought you were doing somebody a favor by cleaning their house, having no idea that that was something that they were, not cleaning up because it reminded them of their dead wife or something dramatic, and you would still
Oh
be a
yeah.
piece of shit even though you meant well.
Yep. I've actually read a lot of stories on Reddit where that some some variation of that has happened where
Yeah.
whether it was a family member cleaning or maybe they got into a new relationship and that person goes like, "Oh, well, they're over their ex, they're over their dead ex. It doesn't matter. I'm helping them by, throwing this out." And yeah, and funnily enough,
Mhm.
you might be right. You might be right. Maybe they did need to let that go, but that's not your place. That is not your place to just do that for
Exactly.
them. And it's awful when that happens. I'm sure we've all heard stories about people like stealing the ashes of people's dead family members, whether it's just for like revenge or something, and like dumping them without permission. Like that's a thing that's happened plenty. And it doesn't
Mhm.
matter even if they were right to do it. That's
Or
that's
I
fucked.
have heard a story about this before where somebody went in to clean somebody's house and they found a baggie full of what looked like dust and threw it away. Yeah, they threw away somebody's dead relative.
Rough.
Yeah, but, like, that's the kinda thing, like, you may have been doing your damnedest to do a good thing for them, that doesn't make you less of a cunt for doing it.
Yep.
Like,
It doesn't make it right.
you did it. Yeah, like, you did it with the best of intentions, but that doesn't make it better.
It's really just violating, the person's trust is really all that is. If you're doing it without their consent, without talking to them, without
Yeah.
negotiating it beforehand, you're just
You're
violating their trust.
violating their boundaries with extra
Yes,
steps.
exactly. And it's gross in any circumstance.
Yep.
And while sometimes it's about something that won't be important, it just, especially in kink circles, it's always important. It's always important that those things are respected. Anyways, I think we've discussed this enough. Kind of beating a dead horse here. What are we talking about in the next episode?
That's a good question. What are we discussing in the next episode? Any ideas?
I'm at a loss this week.
I have no idea what's going on.
I don't know what
ever.
you guys have even discussed much because I don't know what was on the episodes before me. So I will go with whatever
Honestly,
you guys know we haven't talked about.
honestly, we can even re-talk about things because there's always new things to discuss.
That's true.
We always come up
Really
with new
limited.
things to discuss. Oh yeah.
What was the first episode about?
Consent.
Yeah, well, we do that every single week.
Yeah, we
Which is
literally
so
discuss
important.
consent every week. Yeah,
what one of the earlier episodes we can maybe revisit or something?
we did a Brat episode, a Dom episode, power exchange. We talked about power exchange. What else could we talk about? I'm sure there's a lot we could do still, even if we didn't talk about stuff we'd already done before.
What about talk about group dynamics, group relationships? I don't think we really
Yeah,
talked
I
about
think
that at all.
that would be an interesting one.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
down for
all
that?
right. All right, that's what
Let's
that's
do
what we'll
it.
do. That's what we'll plan for. And then I guess
Mhm.
that'll be in 2 weeks, hopefully.
Yeah,
Hopefully nothing prevents that episode from happening. We'll see. We've kind of
I'm
been in a
getting
rut
sick
recently.
now, but I better not get more.
Yeah, yeah. I'll cross my fingers, knock on wood for that one.
Like I'll need all the good luck we can get here. I started coughing today and it won't
You're,
fuck off. So
you'll
wish
probably
me
just be
luck.
getting better in time for the next episode.
Probably, honestly.
All right. This has been Starbright Podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed listening. Give a like, subscribe, follow, whatever platform you're on, and you can always find our socials, whatnot, on the YouTube, which you can find with a very quick Google search.
We've
And
also
there's a
have a
beacons
beacons.
linked. Yep, that has all of our information there and where you can find us. And I hope to see you guys in 2 weeks. Night night.
Nighty night.
Bye.